things. Other ones hopefully are pretty quick. Confirming the subcommittee roles, sort of getting a idea of where our committees should head. And the bulk of it I'd like to spend on public education and communications, and a lot of work that Sarah and Brett have been doing on potential website. And then if we have time, I think we should address future meetings, formats, and schedule. So if, unless there's anything else, why don't we just kick it off with the updates? And I've gotten a couple questions on if that report is published or not. I haven't been able to find it, the Newbury Plum Island MVP project report. Andy, do you have anything on that?
No, Julie and I checked in with Ellie Baker. They haven't finished it yet. I guess they're still working on some tweaks. We'd understood that there was a deadline to complete the report for grant funding reimbursement. So we're hoping that they're not too far behind with that. But as far as we know, they're still working on it. And we're told that there'll be something forthcoming. Okay.
But no timeline?
No, no specific timeline, unfortunately. Sorry, she didn't provide that. I did, maybe worth noting is I did have a conversation with a consultant the other day. It's not relevant which consultant, but there was some discussion about the fact that coming out of their report, they hadn't done really any kind of detailed analysis about what would be necessary to raise the Plum Island Turnpike. But irrespective of the issues of the barrier beach and whether or not state regulations allow, hard structures and so forth, on the island, just the access to the island itself is probably something that as a planning issue and land use issue, we should look to into the future. I think in essence, we should be probably taking that a step further to estimate what the more detail than what Horsley Witten did to get an idea of what the cost would be, what the work is that would be involved, any permits and so forth, to work out essentially making sure that we continue to have viable access to the island. So putting aside any issues of individual structures or homes or properties, it would seem irresponsible for us to not plan ahead to maintain the access to the island, decades out in the future. And since that takes a while to plan for, to raise funds for, to have a design and permitting for, it seems to be that at least as a resiliency issue for the island and a public safety issue, we probably should be proceeding with something like that.
We Newburyport or we joint Newburyport?
Oh, I would say jointly, but again, where the funds come from remains to be seen. But I think that we need to do a little more work on that, given that that's one of the issues that trails off in the report is that access to the island would be impeded more substantially in the coming decades.
Sure.
But I can't speak to where funds would come from, whether from the city, from the town, both, or a grant program from the state, maybe a supplemental grant or so forth.
All right. Thanks, Andy. Julia, where's the hazard mitigation plan? How's that going?
Oh, Julia, you're on mute, by the way.
All right. Hi. Sorry, guys. It's moving along. I was back and forth with Jennifer Hughes last week and this week. She's getting the data that she needs from the city staff, and it took a little longer than we expected to get the data on repetitive loss properties from FEMA, but we did get some data from FEMA, and I think it might be enough to enable her to finish that section anyway. So, we're definitely, the schedule's been pushed back. We are hoping to get a final report by December, but again, we just need to make sure that we have all the data, and it looks like it is coming together. So I could probably give you a better update at the next meeting and maybe a draft to look at and discuss setting up one of the listening sessions.
Okay, you've gotten everything you need from this group, or you're not waiting for any information then?
No, we've got everything we need from this group. John Eric just recently provided some good updates on some of the sewer infrastructure issues, and Andy's been providing updates on development. And so I think we are closing in on having all the data we need. Again, I'm not sure she has what she needs entirely from FEMA yet, but at least we have something to start with from FEMA.
Okay, great. Thanks. John Eric, I think you sent a written update on the Artichoke Dam. But if you want to spend a minute and just let us know.
Yep. I can do a quick one real quick. So the horizontal footprint of the foundation got enlarged, and it triggered a MIPA filing that Julia knows more, that most of you guys might know about. Once you get into MIPA, it's going to take many months. So long and the short is we'll probably get our full permit January, February. And that is just for the emergency sandbag foundation. That's it. That's all that's for. All the other stuff is separate. So that's my update.
Okay, so if you got a permit January, February, work wouldn't commence until spring, I assume. Or-
Yeah, we aren't too worried about it because I talked them into getting a bunch of stone. They're stockpiling stone in case we get a hurricane over the next couple of weeks. But the good news is the hurricane season is winding down. The stockpile will still be there in the spring. It'll save a little bit of time for putting it in. But yeah, we'll build it in the spring.
Okay. All right. Julia, the choir bags and wood pilings on Plum Island.
Well, we have good news on that, which is that all of the permits, I believe, have been received and they're mobilizing to start work out there now. I don't know if they've actually initiated work by the end of this week, which is the plan. I don't know if they'll get there before Friday, but we had a good pre-construction site visit last week and talked about how everything's going to be placed and strategies for different areas of the stretch where the core bags are going to go along Reservation Terrace. So the first thing that's going to happen is that some of the stones that have the concrete blocks that used to line Reservation Terrace and have tumbled down into the sand a bit over time, those are going to be pulled back to their original position so that the core bags can be placed adjacent to them and on top of them to the elevations that will hopefully protect the roadway and the neighborhood throughout the rest of this year and hopefully until the Merrimack River gets dredged a year from now. And that's really where we are. It's all good. We got the funding in place and moving forward.
Okay, great. I don't think, at least since the new group of us have been here, we've really talked about that project. Does anyone have any questions regarding that project, or are we feeling okay? Moving on. I don't hear anything. Okay, thank you, Julia. Moving on, Andy, can you give us an update on the Central Waterfront Bulkhead project? I know there has been some recent changes in looking for a design anyway.
Yeah, thanks. So hopefully folks can just see, I just had to switch the view so you could see the waterfront plan. This is what was being referred to as the refined conceptual plan, or their essentially the final schematic plan from Sasaki Associates for the Central Waterfront. Jordy's here with me as well, and he can chime in. In essence, I'm just going to speak to two things, two projects, and essentially where we've come out on these issues for resiliency. And then we have some photographs to show the Central Waterfront and how that relates. But in essence, what's happened here is that the issue that was raised was in planning for the Bulkhead project, where there's been restoration of this bulkhead here, but we need to continue that work in the central embayment and on the eastern side. And Jordy's been working on that project in different phases over the years. As we're trying to get the funding wrapped up for the construction of the remaining work on the bulkhead. And I'll show you some photographs in a second, but for those of you who don't know, there's some deterioration that we do need to address, similar to what we did to reinforce and protect the wall on the western side some years back. So in essence, what was raised here was that as we're doing these two projects, we should probably, and John Eric, I'm sure I can speak to this, but the goal was to try to incorporate within these projects, making sure that we're not, one, we're planning ahead for sea level rise, and two, we're incorporating whatever we can at the appropriate times to get that done and not waiting until the last minute, essentially, right? Planning ahead. So we looked through this with the consultants for both projects, particularly the Bulkhead project, but also the park designers from Sasaki. And in essence, we have a couple of visuals I can show here, but in essence, what they were trying to show for us was, as time goes on, and the flooding situation may get worse in the coming years, that there are certain areas of the park that would have further inundation. Since this, Sasaki has done a little more work for this area on the western side to try to raise up as much of the park area as possible out of those future flood zones, including storm surge. as possible. As a reminder for folks, just as similar to a discussion that this committee had a couple years back for Waterfront West and New England Development, was in essence a similar conclusion, which is that we need to try to raise as much as we can of the middle of the property, while recognizing that we may not be able to change adjacent property or our grading, so we'd have to meet those, including accessibility, for instance. So in essence, what has happened here is that Sasaki's done what they can to raise up park space while still meeting the adjacent or existing grades and the central waterfront boardwalk entrances. I'm now just going to switch to a graphic for, just want you to keep in mind, by the way, this photograph right here just is one of the gangway openings, but there are a couple of spots like this. And as I mentioned with that graphic a second ago of the central waterfront, there is storm surge or flooding that can happen from the east and west sides, irrespective of whether we raise the bulkhead wall. So there's only so much that would be accomplished at this point from raising the walls of the bulkhead itself, because we still need to follow through with the east and west sides and recognize that there are these gangway openings that I think John Eric and I had spoken about this, but there are ways of doing things like, putting a plate in there during, prior to heavy storms to sort of close those gaps. But in essence, the east and west sides are substantial extensions that we don't control with this particular project, and they're actually owned by separate parties. So in essence, what the bulkhead designer had done, and I'm just going to switch to a graphic that he had provided to us. This is just a cross section of the boardwalk area. You see there, it's on some supports. You've got the granite block and the grading there for the plantings that are just behind the berm. And then you have the bulkhead wall itself. And so the project that Jordy's been managing in first and subsequent phases we're moving forward with now is to basically put concrete in there and to basically backfill between this FRP panel to protect that concrete that protects the original wall. And these are the steel cells, these large circular cells that provide some structure and support. And we would essentially have a cap added to that. And what was discussed with the designer was the fact that we could do this in several different ways. One of the concerns was, I think a primary one was, if we do this now, are we throwing away money because we're going to have to rip it out later on? And how do we make sure that this is accommodating future sea level rise and raising it up, in advance as much as possible? So in essence, what the designer had showed us was that there's several different times we could do this. We can do this now. We could raise it up higher, but we could also raise it up later. And we're not precluding ourselves or wasting any money, if you will, by doing it in phases. The reason that's important, I think, is because there's a couple of different factors that are ultimately going to dictate whether or not we're able to raise this wall now versus, several years out, recognizing that in a number of decades, we're going to want to have that higher wall. So two things that come into play there. One is, and I actually will switch to another graphic in a second, but he had showed us that basically in different ways that we can raise the height of that. And we're not precluding ourselves just by putting this additional protection here lower from adding height to that in the future. We also looked at the fact that the boardwalk itself may need to be raised and the idea of raising the public space or public realm out of the flood zone and storm surge. And so he had illustrated that, again, that the idea here is not to start from scratch. We wouldn't be doing something and then ripping it out, but in fact, on a future basis, we would be raising the boardwalk itself, which isn't encompassed as part of either the bulkhead project or the park project right now. That's a separate issue and consideration, and one that I think primarily comes from sea level rise. What has been pointed out by the designer of this bulkhead project is that we would be doing this in phases anyway on top of the existing structure. We would go down to the existing substructure that's strong, that the timbers, the planks may be replaced, but we would be working up above that. And the same thing with the cellular structure, we'd be going above that, and the bulkhead wall would go up similarly. So in essence, what I'm just going to switch to a set of slides that Sasaki had used during their presentation again. To the ad hoc committee that's reviewing the park design. And so in addition to the two primary considerations that have come up for whether or not we can do this now, Jordy and I have discussed doing some tweakings to the design to make sure that as we're doing the project, we allow ourselves the ability to add on conveniently in the future And also that we consider the ability to do what we call an add alt. When we do a bid for a project, we might bid the base work, which is the concrete protection with the FRP panels, but also add an alternate bid. So they would propose a second number essentially for us as what it would cost to raise that, to do the additional height. So if we're looking at what that would look like, and say that's that green piece right there, what would that cost? So we would have a good idea. And if the funds are available, as Jordy knows, but the funds aren't quite lined up yet for the construction of this project, we're working on that, including trying to look at federal funds coming down for infrastructure projects. If the funding is there, we'd be able to mobilize and go ahead with that. If the funding is there with that add alternate in the bid, in the lease, we'd have an estimate of what that would cost. But in the bare lease, we would be making sure that this is designed so it can easily accommodate. And that might be through bolt patterns that are in place or rebar that, is set up in advance to, go with the additional structure above it. But so cost is one factor. That's the primary one to mention here. And then the second one is, this is key, is the fact that the Waterfront Trust actually controls the boardwalk area. That's actually property under their control, not the city's directly. They had met and discussed this issue, and they had a concern about if this was raised. So if a pedestrian's here and we're raising this structure here, without raising the boardwalk, which is a much bigger undertaking, it would substantially increase the cost of the project and other complications. If we were to do that and raise that wall, then the folks who sit here would not be able to do so. And those who are standing here, even their view of the water, their experience of the adjacency to the water would be diminished in that experience. So they did not feel at this point, knowing that this was something that could be phased, they did not feel it was appropriate to put that additional height in now, knowing that there's probably a couple of decades before that becomes necessary. So what their suggestion was, and their preference was that we move ahead and do the base work. They had no objection to us, looking for an alternate bid and seeing, where funding lies at that point, but they were hesitant to have us move ahead, and they were reluctant to have us do that, knowing that it would change the experience for a lot of folks along the edge there. And we do have some photographs to show that. I want Jordy to be able to chime in this as well. But just keep in mind that those are the two key reasons why that may not proceed in the near term, even though what we have confirmed, and which is probably most appropriate, is that we are able to do that in phases. We would not be throwing any money away by doing the base work and then adding on to it. So I do hope that we get the funds and are able to increase the height of that in a nearer term. But the two concerns were that it may make the project, not financially viable based on the funding sources we're even trying to get now just for the base project. And the Waterfront Trust owning and controlling the property, not being comfortable with the additional height of that wall and not being quite ready to raise the boardwalk itself, which this diagram from Sasaki shows that we would do and can do at different points as needed, raising the pilings, those heights, or replacing them with a higher height, raising the bulkhead wall itself, which is the primary barrier of protection, recognizing, like I said, that east and west, we'd have to deal with those ends, similar to what we talked about, or some of us who were here talked about with NED several years back, which is that they'd raise the center of their site. We recognize we can't force them to raise someone else's adjacent property, but they'd have to meet existing grades. And so there was essentially a middle of the site, like I said, with the Sasaki plan being raised, and then the ends tapering off to meet existing grades. He's shown here that the pilings, the bulkhead wall, the boardwalk, and then of course from Sasaki's end, we would phase in the future as needed. Whenever the bulkhead or the boardwalk is being raised, we would do some slight grading changes for the access points to make sure that those are still working. But we wouldn't be sort of wasting money or throwing it away in either project or respect. With that, I do want to flip to some photographs and let Jordy weigh in on this as well.
So Andy, can I ask a quick question? Does
Sure.
Waterfront Trust have a plan to raise the boardwalk? Are they looking forward into the future for that to be necessary and are looking at funding for it themselves?
Yeah, so I wasn't involved with all of their conversations, but in essence, they've acknowledged and don't disagree that it needs to be raised. They're also interested, frankly, in upgrading the boardwalk just as a general maintenance, thing to do from time to time. They've been looking at some of the planks in there and want to make sure that they're replacing them, as soon as they need to be. So they don't have a specific plan. They don't have a specific funding source. I think for those of you who have been involved with some of these waterfront projects, it really does come down, I think, mostly to the city's efforts to get funding from sources, both the city's own sources of funding and outside, so federal and state funding sources. Jordy's gone after a number of these in the past. We have Nancy London working with Jordy as well on grant funding for this project, including some of the infrastructure funds that are coming down. But generally speaking, the Waterfront Trust has acknowledged the need for this. They're just not quite comfortable with doing it just yet. And I think that they are still somewhat reliant upon us to do a lot of the legwork involved to pursue those funds, even though I'm sure they'd be happy to be co-applicants and so forth.
Shall I just jump in quickly here?
Yeah, please. And I can flip through the photos, Jordy.
I know you have a long meeting and Andy gave a pretty thorough overview there. I'll just underline a couple of quick things. I think, the overarching picture here is that Newburyport and its leadership and the community and citizens and so forth, we all need to we need to be used to the idea that every 20 years or so, we need to be doing capital investments to upgrade and phase in, resiliency investments. And that's just going to be part of what's required to keep our waterfront safe for everybody. Ideally, we could do all these things sort of at once, but that's really not feasible financially or logistically or otherwise. This is a picture of the western, the bulkhead towards the west, which we put in 2014. It's pretty clear that the rest of the bulkhead really needs to happen now. The repair of the existing bulkhead needs to happen now, similar to this repair with the FRP sheets and the concrete. We're having actually more significant problems in the embayment now. There's the weep holes that are expanding and fill is coming out of those structural cells. And some of the tie rods are starting to disappear in the embayment that actually hold the sheet piles up. So we cannot wait to do these repairs to keep the whole bulkhead system intact for a number of decades into the future. It would be great if we had the funding and wherewithal to raise the boardwalk, because that is certainly going to happen given sea level rise at some point. But the boardwalk was reconstructed about 20 years ago. And even though there's spot repairs are needed here and there, it's certainly got a good deal of life left in it. And it has, it estimated to be maybe another 20 years or something in terms of both sea level rise as well as the tropical hardwood timbers and so forth. So given that there's general agreement, maybe not everyone, but general agreement that we really can't raise the boardwalk now. That cost $2 million 20 years ago and would presumably cost $3 or $4 million now. We're building to that sort of existing condition. Andy already went over the Waterfront Trust stance on this. And the marine engineer has spent a good deal of time looking at alternatives. And we do have a variety of options. So we are going to do the add-alt. Andy, if you don't mind going back to that diagram, there are several different ways we can deal with this in the future, 20 years from now and more going forward. Whether it's increasing the elevating the cap, which is that green rectangle there, just essentially building a new concrete wall on top of that, and having the new boardwalk height essentially meet that. An alternative, frankly, is building up on the existing concrete cap right next to that, which is that red rectangle right there that Andy's circling. Essentially providing the same function, the concrete wall going up to an appropriate height. The marine engineers also pointed out that in terms of the park in the back, the waterfront park, we have the option potentially in the future of raising that landform as well as that granite block edge that we have going along the berm. So there's several different ways we can do it. The current conceptual estimate for the Bulkhead project is $4.3 million. That's a lot for Newburyport. The raising of The cap now would be an additional $500,000. So we are hoping to be able to apply for state grants and federal grants for this, but that's the approach that we've come down to, and I think I'll stop talking now.
Thank you, Jordy. So just to make sure that we're clear, no matter if we raise it or not now, there will be, and we will not be doing anything that would preclude us from building on top of it in the future.
That's exactly correct. And that's one of the main things we wanted to make sure we weren't sort of wasting money or throwing money away.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I had dug up this old photograph just because I think it helps to illustrate a little bit of, we'd be working off the existing substructure for all elements of this. So again, while we'd love to do the work now and, and be prepared for, 50 years out, if the funding is not there, and given the Waterfront Trust, concern about the public experience on land that they control, which we would need, their agreement to do some of this work. What we're doing here is essentially designing it so that we can add up whether it's the wall itself or the walkway or changes to the park design and the ramps that come in to meet the boardwalk.
Okay, and then the integrity of the boardwalk, should that area flood, it will not be compromised, right? Like the boardwalk can take flooding.
The boardwalk can indeed take flooding. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then,
that's actually a great question. If I could just show a slide to that point. Sasaki had shown just from some other park projects examples where parks are essentially being designed to try to handle some of these things, whether it's hardscape, the ability to shed water quickly and so forth, but parks where it's actually recognized that these are public spaces that may on occasion be inundated by water.
okay, and then I guess my last question before I open up to the others is in terms of applying for funding, am I right in thinking that, so it's 4.3 million and then another estimated 500,000 to raise it. Are you going for the full amount, but then there's flexibility if you don't receive it, we don't have to go back for permit? Like, I'm just, the whole permitting thing, is that kind of coming, I don't know how to say, presented in stages so that you can do whatever you need to do given the funding that you receive?
Yes, it's a good question to clarify that. So we are pursuing the permitting. We've just put in our notice of project change, for instance, to MIPA for this. So the permitting should cover basically everything. So cover building the bulkhead to the existing height or having it raised now or in the future. The environmental permitters are frankly more focused on the area taken up by the concrete infill, but they're looking for the alternatives analysis for the sea level rise to make sure that's been thought through. So yes, from a permitting perspective, we're looking to cover all those bases. We haven't written the grant applications yet, but I think the idea is that we're applying for what we think is the full amount. But if we only get pieces of grants, we're not locked into sort of an all or nothing approach.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions, comments?
I have a few. Does anyone else want to go ahead of me?
Oh, go right ahead. Let us know if there's any graphic you want to show, but go right ahead.
Yeah, show the one with the cap. Raising the cap. And then the one with the green rectangle for the future. I'm gonna go back and forth with those two, Andy. So, yeah, that one there. So stay on this just for a minute, real quick. The magenta lines to the left are misleading because the existing block and the existing earth is already higher. Nobody's recommending to cut. So that's an incremental thing. The problem that I want this group to understand about this, if they build the cap lower and then we go in the future to add on top of the cap, I think most people understand that when you start adding a wall to a top of a wall, that connection is going to be very difficult to have any kind of strength. It's more of a cantilever. So cutting into the concrete, adding that vertical piece is so undesirable in the future because it's just not a good way to build a wall. They can do it, but the saltwater has a lot of corrosion. Concrete gets corroded. I mean, there are additives you make and all that. So this I'm totally against. I'm a proponent of raising the cap. If you go to the cap, Andy.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Could we just clarify something, Jordy? If I'm not mistaken, we're working with Russ, the designer, to John Eric's point, which was one of the concerns I think we had raised was how does that get anchored? Drilling holes later on, putting epoxy in. He said what we might be able to modify what is the base even to allow essentially a pre-established anchor point and connection mechanism that is stronger, essentially, to John Eric's point. Just I don't know if you can clarify on that point what you've discussed with Russ.
we haven't seen the design because it hasn't been done yet, but the marine engineering firm GEI, basically they feel pretty strongly that doweling in the concrete wall extension on top would work perfectly well in terms of strength and functioning as the seawall.
Well, what I don't like about that, Jordy, is putting in dowels, preparing for future. This is a highly corrosive environment. A boat hits it, knocks it off. It's not installed properly. But that's actually not the best reason, but adding to metal components and concrete components in the future and not expecting major corrosion is a very optimistic, unrealistic viewpoint. If you go to the cap, this cap is only 12% additional cost for the project. I disagree with cost being a problem. If we can't afford a 12% increase to this, then we just got $1 million for the resiliency grant. A resiliency grant of $1 million for the bike path, and that only gave us resiliency for like half a foot of sea level rise. If you go to the cap, raising the cap on this one, I personally don't think we're going to have any problem with money. But if you show the cap,
I'd like that to be.
Jordy, let me just finish.
Oh, sorry, John Eric.
Have me disagree doesn't mean I have to. It's totally fine. I want this group to hear the other side because you're portraying a situation that is going to make it look like a future improvement is going to be easily accomplished. We might not have money in the future. There's going to be so much other things that we might have to do. If we raise this for 12% more now, and Andy, can you go to the cap, please?
Yeah, I'm not. When you say go to the cap, I'm not sure what the other diagram is really just roughly the same as this, right? It's just the same.
No, it's not. It's not the same as this at all.
This one here?
Yeah. So what they're doing is they're raising the fiberglass sheet. So when you raise the fiberglass sheet, you aren't just raising the cap. You're also adding a cap on top. So the Waterfront Trust was worried that a little girl sitting on the side who shouldn't be sitting on the side won't be able to sit on the side on this. Well, my answer is build a new rail when this gets built, build a new rail so you can have your little kids sit on the side. Not doing climate resiliency because of people sitting on this is very lame.
John,
and the reason why I say that is he still supported that when I brought it up because he felt that there will be technical inventions that are going to return the climate back to normal. So I disagree with his belief that climate's an issue, and I want this group to know that.
Yeah, John Eric, I'm not sure. John Eric, I'm sorry. Let me interrupt here. I'm not sure who you're referring to when you say that, but I just want to make it very clear here. We're in agreement on sea level rise and addressing that. What we're trying to point out here, and I think what needs to be balanced here, and other folks do need to understand as well, is this isn't a question of whether this should be raised. The problem is the ideal situation you're describing, which is that funding is available to do this now, may not be there. And the property owner involved that needs to give approval for some of this work is not on the same page about this. So it's not a question of whether or not we think in a vacuum we can do that. There are other factors that come to play, not just the ideal. I want what you want for that sort of design, but like lots of other issues we work with, this is a balance between several different public policy questions and issues. And those are the ones that are coming to play here. We're trying to make sure that we can do this at the earliest possible date, including the upcoming bid of this project. What we can't control is whether or not the Waterfront Trust will want to see that happen here based on the impact to the public experience. We also can't guarantee the funds are there. And to Jordy's point, I don't think it makes sense for us to say, well, the percentage is the gap and that's what we need to do. When if the reality is that the outside funding source is not there and the city council and the mayor do not have more capacity to bond here locally based on other capital projects, it would seem to be still a mistake to not do the restoration and work to prepare for the bulkhead wall that is deteriorating rapidly on the base.
So what I'm hearing is, I'm just trying to think of the role of this committee can play in this. It sounds like you are applying for the full estimated amount anyway. And if you do get it, if we do get it, yeah, then we can go forward with the Waterfront Trust Agreement. And it sounds like there might be a role for this committee to play in communicating with the Waterfront Trust to lay that groundwork, to decide should the funding be available, how we will move forward.
Yeah, Jane, I think that's a great point because in reality, the funding is one thing, right? But that's just a numbers thing. If the money is there, then we're back to the Waterfront Trust. So certainly some discussion with the Waterfront Trust, regardless of where that comes out, would be helpful because it's the two primary factors right now that might impede raising the height now.
Okay. And so I'm always looking at the time and we're really behind, but I don't necessarily want to cut this conversation short. But if we can agree that for this committee, that might be the next steps, depending on where the funding comes in, or maybe even before, just to start that conversation, we can do that. Does that sit well with folks?
Yeah, I just want to finish my point, Jane.
Sure.
My point is when I hear the engineer come up with a solution that we can fix it in the future, I just want to make sure that the add alternate that gets put into the construction docks, that's a good idea. I want Andy and Jordy know that I think that's a great idea. But I would prefer the add-alt to show this cap because there's more benefits with this cap because you're raising the sheet pile, you're raising the cap. Boats can rise with a surge of sea without being unmoored. There's just a lot of benefits with this. I just want this group to be aware that when just because the consultant says that, oh, well, this is X, you need to question it because he's going to, you just need to question it. That's all. And,
no, I hear you. And as a layman looking at that, I was like, well, what about the structural integrity, especially in the with the salt?
And by all means, this engineer is a very good engineer. He's a very good engineer, but every engineer still has their ways of doing things and they still may prefer doing something in the future. That still might work. I just want this group to be a proponent of doing the right thing now, because if the mayor or the city council says we don't have the money, that's why we're in the boat we're at, because it's always about not having the money. And now that's why we are where we are.
Okay. All right. Thank you, John, Eric, and everyone. Does anyone else have any quick comments or questions that we can either follow up with now or later?
Oh, and as far as the Sasaki design, they did a great job. Julie and I looked at it. We liked it. We offered to give it to this group to review, but we trust that you guys would like it. There's not much you can do for Phil. Their fill is going to help us through like 2050, and fill is inexpensive. We can do that in the future.
Okay. And is that available on the city's website so we can take a look at it if we're curious?
Well, Sasaki's plans are posted there's a couple of meetings that have been posted, and those have links to a project page underneath the planning department. So if you go planning department, project updates, Market Landing Park, you should be able to see the presentation materials and basically the visuals that I was just showing you within there.
So All right, yeah, I haven't been on for a little while, so I didn't know if that was updated yet. Great, okay. Thank you all. I'm making a note of next steps on that, and
I want to commend John Eric for trying to push the envelope of resiliency here. Like everyone else, it is the right thing to try to do. It's just that we're trying to balance multiple issues. I think that's just what we're trying to point out. But he's right that we should be trying to do what we can when the resources are there, when the willingness is to step forward on different issues. It's the same. I think we're going to have the same sort of incremental discussions to a degree, partly based on funding, partly based on permitting, for instance, for various different issues around the city, whether that be Plum Island or the Central Waterfront or otherwise.
oh, I think you're absolutely right. In fact, this may be one of the easier ones that we confront. So we should get this one right, figure out how to go forward. Okay.
I'm gonna hop off, Jane, just because
All
I think I'm not needed for the rest.
All right.
Thank
Thank you, Jordy. Julia, could you bring up the straw poll results?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
One sec. Going to go. Can you all see that?
Yep. So thank you all for getting back to me on this. I liked this visual. It became really clear, who's doing what, and also the coverage of what we have. This is on our shared Google Drive. So it looks like I take away from this two things. One, I think we have great coverage for all the areas that we discussed in brief last month and what we want to do for the next year or year and a half. And also that we are spread pretty thin. So we have that coverage, but we're spread pretty thin. So that kind of opens up that conversation for not necessarily new committee members, although I'd be open to that, but also just resources in the community, those that can help us out. But we had talked about last meeting about splitting up into different subcommittees. So the regulations working group, working mostly on zoning, looking at the floodplain, looking at Plum Island, public education and communication that we'll get to a little in a couple minutes, water and sewer infrastructure, funding sources, and really giving the plan teeth, so integrating resiliency into the city operations. So I'll leave this just at that. I wanted to let you know where we stand. I didn't hear back from John Eric and Andy, so I'll just put you guys down for everything. Does that sound right?
I'm going to definitely put Andy down on the regulations working group.
No doubt.
That definitely makes sense.
Yeah, and Jane, I just didn't see the email. Sorry. I mean,
that's okay.
It's not that I ignored it. So I apologize.
No worries. I'll send it out again if you want, but I know you'd be water and sewer infrastructure. I think you're pretty much touching everything. So, but this was primarily for us volunteers too, to sort of figure out where we're at.
Yeah.
Could you just do one to the left, Julia, the NRC resources?
Mm-hmm.
So I started this list of, as I've been talking to folks, of asking who else out there can help us as we move forward. And this is also in the drive. So just let you know, if you come up with a name, if you find somebody who wants to work on a certain something in the community, either let me know or just go on ahead and add to this as we go forward. A lot of this is city staff, but we have some other names. I know Rick Tainer's on this call. He very much is interested in the regulations working group. I've met a really interesting person that is interested in sustainable agriculture that might be able to help us out. I've been talking to John O'Connell lately, and he was a previous committee member. And Janet Daisley, one of our fellow committee members, has also told us that someone else from the Conservation Law Foundation might be able to help us with zoning, who's been heavily involved in Boston. So, and then there's a couple other folks on here too. So the stronger this list is, I think the better our work can be. So please keep in mind when you're out there talking, if there's anybody that you think can help us, let me know.
A great start.
Okay, so Julia, how about the CIP list?
Is that this one? Yes, got it.
So just trying to get our heads around what we're going to be tracking for the next year. And, you know, as Sarah has offered to put this list together, she looked through the CIP. And so right now it's not probably organized as most effectively as it can be, but I wanted to present this to let you know that this is what we're starting. We're referring back to the resiliency plan when the item is in the plan. And so I'm hoping that everyone that has been working on these projects, this is, you know, mostly city staff. If you see any inaccuracies, if you have any ideas, you know, you want to add anything to this, we'll formalize this going forward, but it's a start, and any input is welcome, I guess is my thought. Sarah, did you have anything else on this that you wanted to say?
Just more of a question on the process. So for someone who hasn't been very involved with this in the past, since these projects got into the budget and the CIP, are they now definitively going forward and should be tracked? And should we have like a rough time frame for when we will start getting status on them? Or is it more complicated than that, and it's not a guarantee that they're going to go forward?
I can give that a stab. Andy, you might want to give that a stab. Do you mind if I give a stab for the
right ahead.
DPS?
Yeah.
So for DPS, what we do is probably similar to everyone, but so this is how it works, Sarah and Jane and Brett. Each of us departments put together our own CIP. It's technically a wish list that gets into a real thick document. And it's just a simple template that you'll see when you grab this from the website. It's the same template that we use and we submit. We give it to the mayor. The mayor does her thing. She presents to the city council her recommendations. And then they go back and forth, go to subcommittee, and they do all their thing. And then the city council either funds for the fiscal year that they're planning on, for the upcoming fiscal year that they're planning the budget on, they'll either fund that particular CIP or not. The CIPs all stay in the big document of CIPs. The problem that the city has is that it's very hard to know which ones of those CIPs are really getting funded for the upcoming fiscal year. Trust me, even us workers never know when we're halfway through the fiscal year whether something got funded. We have to, it's a long story. So we end up going to the final budget that's approved, and we work backwards, and then we realize what was funded.
So if these showed up in the final budget that was published on the website, does that mean they're funded? Because this list was from that. It wasn't from the one that was submitted.
So this came from the budget
from the
list?
From the budget doc.
Yeah, if it's posted as the
one.
approved budget, then it's been funded. Yeah, to answer that question, but you know, I don't know. I wasn't trying to quite follow all of what John Eric was saying there, but I definitely think that it's hard for us to know. Certainly, maybe not once the budget's been approved, of course, but certainly leading up to the budget's review and approval, and what the mayor actually proposes, based on available sources and balancing a number of different competing interests, of course, because there's limited funds. It is hard for us sometimes to know whether or not we'll be able to mobilize, you know, or we'll be able to run with a project, because it isn't necessarily clear to us until the capital improvement projects are being recommended, you know, as part of that yearly budget cycle, whether or not that's the project that is moving ahead.
So obviously future fiscal years are our wish list, but for fiscal year 22, can you guys count on the fact that these are funded now and can move forward with them?
If you got it from the budget list, then they are. We can help back check to make sure that you did it right. I'm sure you did.
Yeah, yeah, that would be great.
But the only importance, Sarah, is the only reason why I'm phrasing it that way is for this group. This goes back to appropriation of money, and I don't have an attitude, even though I always do. But no, I understand this. For every fiscal year, you got to work with what money you have. That's fine. My point for this group is that DPS has like 40 CIPs, but we only see like 5 right here. So out of those 40, there's a lot of resiliency in those 40. So when the Resiliency Committee starts looking at, hey, what are we doing for resiliency? We are doing a great job. We're doing a lot of good stuff in resiliency. Kudos to everyone in this group and city council and mayor and everyone else. But there are CIPs that are resilient that I recommend that this group adds to this list, because then because the ones that I added to the DPS CIP that didn't get funded, a lot of them came from the resiliency report. So I think our job is to make sure our resiliency report is being watched and then be cognizant of what we actually have funded. This is actually a good news that these are funded. So we're almost like, hey, we're almost done with this one. So that's we also want to watch the ones that aren't funded yet.
Yeah, that was my question in terms of, I looked at this list and it's great and it is good. But I was assuming there were other projects out there that are in the pipeline that might not have received funding yet.
Correct. There's a lot.
And I think it's important for us to have that list as well. And so I'd like to continue filling this.
And one more thing is I'm only one person. I didn't add everything in our resiliency that was appropriate for DPS. So all you guys will realize that real quick. When you look at the CIP that we have for the wish list, there's going to be stuff in there that's not that we haven't done yet. And
right.
That's fine. That's fine too. But that's just part of our job of tracking to make sure that we're keeping our nose clean.
Right.
Julie, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, not to add to what you just said, Jenna, because I think that that's all correct. But just that I think when it comes to this group and this group's role in the CIP process, that we do have a resiliency plan, like you mentioned, with a lot of important recommendations in it, and that annually, and I think we've already discussed this, that annually this group can be looking at that plan and with the help of city staff, pulling out those recommendations that we want to make priorities for the upcoming year to be added to the CIP list and get actually funded. So rather than spending a lot of time looking at the whole long list and where things are, let's just like annually, we'll pull them out and we'll get them on the list and we'll make sure that those are moving forward.
Julia, when does that happen? How does that, is there a timeline for that getting on the annual list?
That's what, I mean, we have to set up that process as a resiliency committee, and when we want to take a look, have a meeting that we dedicate to taking a look at the resiliency plan, seeing where we are on some of these things and discussing what we want to pull in as new priorities or complete, if things haven't been completed yet. Do you agree with that, John, Eric, and Andy?
I think that's perfect.
Yeah.
Is there a timeline? I mean, when is the budget built or put together?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
So Ethan sends out information to department heads in January, and then we have to have it in. And he sets a timeline at that point. So by the end of February, all of these have to be put into place or sent in to him, and then it's reviewed by the mayor and then with the department head again. So it's generally, I would say, from January to March is the time frame.
Okay, great.
So maybe we want to set our first meeting in January or a December meeting of this committee to be the meeting where we kick off that discussion.
I think that would be great.
Excellent.
And I absolutely agree with doing that. But I don't want to lose sight of this list as well, just to educate the new members of what is going on currently, because I'm very likely not aware of it all. And if we do have a list of current projects that are at least tangentially resiliency oriented or fully resiliency oriented, I think it'll be easier.
Well, and there's also a public relations aspect of showing progress. That we showed last year there was the $1 million project, and if this year there's a handful more that get done, then it does us good to highlight that.
Absolutely. Julia, can you scroll down a bit? Because I think there's one more part. Molly had started a list of completed projects. And so that's where I'm kind of going with this is completed projects, current projects, future projects. And however we want to lay it out in whatever spreadsheet or whatever format, I would find that very helpful. And then Sarah, I think, has a great point with communicating with the public and our fellow residents of what we're doing and the progress we're making.
Yeah, I think this is good to also show city council as well as, I don't know, if FEMA could ask for, what the city's putting in or what the city has done so far.
Mhm.
Whoever, there could be a number of audiences.
I think we can add to this the Reservation Terrace Dune Stabilization Project that we're undertaking right now. But maybe we want to wait till it's actually completed, but that would be something we could put in completed projects, even though it's more like it's not really a planning process or a long-term thinking kind of a project. It is resiliency. It is related to Plum Island.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Who will be updating this?
Who put this? Jane, did you put this together?
Sarah put it together, but I'll
Sarah?
take responsibility for making sure that it gets updated. Although I may delegate the updating.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I'm happy to save a copy of this and be the person updating it. If that helps.
Jane, if I may also suggest it, to the extent that you or Ethan Manning, our finance director, have time, it might be worth touching base with him just so that as we're talking about projects that have been approved or, to John Eric's maybe comments earlier, there's a sort of universe of projects that are listed in the CIP, but then they're the ones that are actually year funded. So if we're talking with Ethan Manning, maybe about confirmation of what funds are available, what might be, expected to be brought forward in an upcoming budget for funding, he could provide some guidance on that, I think, as well.
okay, great. Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And he'll have an idea of what's happening.
And I know this might be too much detail, but this is important. The reason why I phrased everything the way I did is when we give our wish list, down the bottom, it asks for what amount of money we want funded this coming fiscal year. And we put a number in for this fiscal year. And that whole 1,000 CIPs get published, but only some get funded, but nobody goes back to delete that proposed dollar amount that we requested for that year. It looks like when you look at it a year later and you look back and you go, oh, everyone in my office, they're like, oh, we funded that for $500,000. No, we didn't go back and delete the amount on that line item. That might be too much detail for you guys to follow, but that's why it's confusing for everyone.
So that's what Ethan could provide, the guidance on what actually got funded?
And then go back and put 0 on any CIP document for any past fiscal years. If it didn't get funded, change it back to 0. It's because it's just the way we have it, and it's all right. We're used to it, but as long as you guys know it, that's all. I got to go to a new meeting. Sorry about that.
Thank you, John Eric.
Right.
Welcome.
John Eric.
Something, okay. I'm trying to figure out how to get this all done now. I will definitely revisit this with folks. Does anyone, Julia, you said you'd help with updating?
Yep, sure.
Okay, and Sarah, since you started this all, I'm gonna rope you in and we'll figure it out from here. Does that sound all right?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I wish I had mentioned this when John Eric was on, that he has worked with Nancy London, the city's grant writer, on putting together a list of resiliency related grants. And they're also working on a database for grants that the city has applied and may not have received, that are resiliency oriented as well, and explanations as to why we might not have received it. So that's in the works for future funding and financing as well, which is it's great. I'm thrilled that that's happening. Okay, moving on. Public education and communication. Julia, I know the brochure was basically done last time we talked.
Yes.
Do you have a quick update on that, if anything?
Sure. I'm just going to do a new share here because Janet and you were the ones who gave me some good good feedback about the brochure. I didn't hear from anybody else, but I just wanted to go through how you all commented on the text and see if anybody else had any comments to make. And if you all agree on these things, I'll make those changes. So we went through these as the text: rising sea level, extreme precipitation, devastating winds. Let's see, where are the, oh, I've not seen the comments aren't showing up here for some reason. Inundated, I agree. Oh, so that the comment was right. The comment was that inundated might be a word that's sort of not strong enough to get people to understand what really happened. So to change that to flooding or submerged, but happy to do that. Next comment was down here under infrastructure and installations and improvements. And here the comment was, sorry. Oh, that was just a font change thing. Acronyms for the wastewater treatment facility. FEMA, spelling out that acronym. Actually, I think that most people will know what FEMA is, and because we have limited space in this brochure, I'd rather not spell that out unless people really think that it might be misunderstood by folks.
I think FEMA is fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So really, these were just sort of minor comments that I agree with most of them. Yes, things like insect disease vectors. I don't think we need to use the term vectors. We can just say insect diseases. That will be nice to save space. So I agreed with all of these. Net zero emissions, right? Not widely understood term by the public, so perhaps linked to what this means. I don't know what you think about that, Molly, if there's another way to say it. In this case, how to describe net zero emissions without it going over people's heads.
Yeah, I can get you something on that.
Okay, cool. Here to say carbon impact, I think that makes sense. And then let's see, you had some big picture, you both had some big picture comments too. Or the call to action statements warrant more thoughts. Call to action, the first one is let's rally together to ensure the future of the future success of our home. And you both thought that maybe that would be better to be termed community rather than home, and I think that's fine. A second call to action would want to learn more about how you can be climate resilient. You thought that seemed awkward as people can't really be climate resilient, but they can learn more about how to support climate resilient strategies for the community. So change that to something like want to learn more about how you can support or contribute to Newburyport's climate resiliency strategies. And I also agree that's a fine change. I think that will make it more clear to people. So if anyone else has any comments on any of this or on the format of the brochure, please send me an email and I will take a look and see if we can incorporate any more changes that people want to make. Otherwise, I'm going to get this back to Bill Goff at Mechanica and see if he can update the brochure and give us something more final to look at the next meeting.
Julia, for those of us that weren't around when the brochure, the whole idea started, how do you envision it being used? Like how will it be distributed? Where will it be in the city? How does that?
I mean, this resiliency brochure, to be honest, I can't even remember when and how it became a project and the idea for the project came about. I think it was at a resiliency committee meeting a year or two ago where it was determined that we should have a brochure to get this information out to the public. This would be the easiest, quickest way to do it. We just want to give people a broad idea of the fact that climate change is happening in Newburyport, that these would be some of the impacts that Newburyport would be facing, and that we're looking at it and we're doing something about it. Just the basics. And that's why we ended up with this sort of brochure format, which really does just give just the basics. And that's it. And it could be sent out in tax bills. It can be handed out at City Hall and things like that. But I think it was meant to be distributed broadly through the tax bills. Am I right, Andy, or anyone else want to weigh in on that?
I think so. I think the basic premise was based on the Conservation Commission pamphlet that we sent out. And we had the connection with, I don't remember his name, the guy who
Yeah,
does.
Bill Goff. Yeah.
And he did a great job on that. And it seemed like the right thing to do.
Yeah, but if people, I mean, I know the question has come up from others that like, what's the point of this brochure? Who is it meant for, et cetera. If people have other thoughts about how it should be, you know, conceptually how it should move forward, please let me know. Again, this came about at least a couple of years ago in terms of the idea of it.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think that the work that Julia and Bill have done on this is great. I think it's come out really well. But I do think that it is important to do the educational side of it, because the regulatory and capital improvement side of it, it isn't quite as understandable to folks, and it isn't understood the urgency, you know, for instance, if that message isn't widely understood by the community. So I do think that educational piece is important.
Well, I think we've been, Sarah, Brett, and I have been, and we'll get to this in a second, about the website, just trying to think of an overall communication strategy. Brochure certainly, it could be one component of it. And I think it could actually also be a really great start for any language we use in a website as well. So I just, you know, I think looking at it holistically, moving forward, you know, be helpful. I just didn't know if you had, like, you know, the printing numbers and, you know, a certain plan on how to distribute it before we get into the website discussion.
Not really, other than to have it be sent out by mail to everybody, because it's really the only way to reach people. I mean, so many people will never go to a website on climate resiliency in Newburyport. They will just never go there. But we need people to understand that this is our reality and that the city's looking at it and doing something about it. That's just kind of what the essence of this thing is.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Sarah, do you want to do that, to talk about the website? And so Julia, there's one of them in there that has Sarah's name on there.
Yes. Okay, hold on.
The slides one, the
Yeah.
yellow.
This one?
I think the October.
Is it this one? I can't see because I have something on my screen that's covering all of my tabs. So I'm literally just guessing. Oh, here it is.
There you
Okay.
go. You got it. Yep. Okay, so we're calling this the website proposal, but we kind of backed into the website by talking through just how we were going to move forward with an implementation plan. And after the last meeting, I was stumbling around looking at various websites, and one of them, which I'll show you, was implementation, the website is the implementation plan. So, so we kind of went down the rabbit hole based on that. But the initial goals were to figure out how to take the action table that has been put together in the resiliency plan and the multi-hazard mitigation plan and turn that into trackable metrics and projects, and then be able to communicate the goals and status in a way that's easy to understand and easy to keep up to date. And obviously, sort of to your point, Julia, we know we reached the choir, but we need to go beyond that in order to get support and enable the implementation plan. So figure out how to reach the full breadth of all the constituents. And so, well, we're going to talk about a couple of website options that we've looked at here. The real work is defining the plan, and that can happen in parallel regardless of what platform we end up using to implement it. So if you go to the next slide, and as we transition to this next slide, I don't think we're going to go through it, but Brett has put together a document that we can share in the notes. It's out in the Google Drive, that he pulled together everything out of the resiliency plan that seemed like it was a requirement that could be aligned with a website. So it's a good start at a sort of a requirements document for a website. And we'll leave that to be looked at offline. But the first one that I was looking at was, and I don't know if people have seen it, but Salem Beverly published this year a Resilience Together plan. They got an MVP grant, which is nice. They have a very flashy website that was developed by a consultant who we spoke with. They're a climate and sustainability consultant, and they have worked with 19 different communities to date. And it's not inexpensive, costs $14K up front and $9K per year. But in addition to the website, they're really helping you develop your plan and also communicate it, because they do a certain number of social media posts, which they provide for you. They have the plan in a format that it can be easily translated into annual reports for the city council to show what's been done this year, or other groups. It's nice. A few hesitations in the limited amount of talking that we did with them was after the initial meeting that we had, she wasn't very responsive in terms of additional questions. So that makes me nervous. But it does provide sort of a one-stop shopping, combining the energy. Nashua, New Hampshire has CSO reporting, so you could envision that being pulled into there. Recycling, resiliency. They've got defined metrics and status against the plan. It's very modern. It's well integrated with social media. It's a nice package. So that's one thing that we've looked at.
Do you have any, you said it costs, I was going to say, what was it cost? 14,000 up front. And so when you say 9,000 per year, they do the upkeep, sort of like management of the website?
Not only the management of the website, but working with you to figure out what the updates should be. So it's sort of, you're paying for them as a sustainability consultant to figure out what your package should be for the next year.
That is interesting.
Yeah. So it is interesting. You look at the Cambridge, I mean, a number of big communities are using them.
Really?
They do the hosting as well.
They do the
so
hosting.
Cambridge is also using this Resilient Together.
Well, Resilient Together is the they're using the same
model.
Consultant, but
KLA. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Interesting.
So the next one we looked at, I didn't look at, but others did, was the Energy Together, or Energize, Mass Energize site. So Molly and Jane know more about this than I do because they sat in on the call, but I watched the video. So it's a lower cost, $2K up front, $950 ongoing for communities of our size. It's a somewhat customizable web platform, mostly promoting and tracking climate actions and carbon emissions impact. In the future, it may be able to pull data from state sources. Currently, most of the data is entered manually, as from my understanding. It's a nonprofit that's put it together. It's been around for 3 years, a little over. It's got 5 volunteers, 1 paid employee, 14 communities. Not all, a number of them in the municipality itself isn't doing it, but a grassroots group is doing it on behalf of the municipality. So it had some pluses, like best practice sharing, some outreach playbooks. It's geared towards individual actions. Doesn't currently, in any of the implementations that I saw, cover the full breadth of resiliency stuff that we're looking at, but not to say it couldn't be extended.
Yeah, I would just add to that. So yeah, they are kind of new, and it definitely is right now geared towards individual action. So this would be definitely geared toward residents if people want to find out, what they can do themselves, and if they want to track things, what they're doing in their home, or what links they can find for putting solar on their home, or how they can reduce their waste, or those kinds of things. It's definitely more towards that end.
And then the third group that we talked to, just to hit all levels of investment here, Cape Cod Commission has a climate action initiative on their website. Their website is for the full agency, the Cape Cod Commission. And it was a custom ground up, as if you were redesigning the Newburyport website as a project. So they spent $140K and had a custom design in 2018, and it's hosted and maintained by the group that did the design. They had a lot of different goals: centralized document management among all the member towns, and replacing their sort of outdated org chart-based website were the main ones. One interesting data point we heard from him was their most popular page is the real-time traffic information getting off the Cape on a Sunday afternoon. So the thing that I took away from that was, if you have something that's interesting to people, and the thing that I think Brett mentioned a couple times in our town is the CSOs. If you can use that to drive people to your website, then they can look around and find other things. But it's really good to have something that they're interested in to pull them in. And so that group is sort of way out of our league. They have many design-oriented people on staff. They've got a nice website, but it's a role they've rolled their own at a big cost with a developer group. So the next slide, what we haven't yet looked at, and we certainly need to, is to look at what we can do with the current Newburyport website. And so what we don't really understand, at least Brett and Jane and I don't understand, is what we as volunteers can do in terms of modifying and supporting a page, and then understand it's using Drupal, so what's the learning curve there? What things like Jane just mentioned with leveraging the information from Julia's resiliency brochure and the CSO data, and working with the Energy Commission are obviously pretty interesting in terms of making this worthwhile. And basically, can we look at some of these other sites, and even if we decide we don't want to go down the path of investing in any of them, are there ideas from those that we can borrow and roll our own using the existing Newburyport website? And does that current infrastructure support that? So that's the next investigation.
This is great. You guys did a lot of great work on this. I'm not very techy, so I don't have a lot of comments.
Yeah. So does anybody have any information? I mean, how is the Newburyport City website put together and maintained? Is there IT staff that does that, or how does that work?
No, right now, we can do a little bit in each department, just posting and public meetings. Probably the most experienced person's in the planning office, but she doesn't have time to design. But I think I mentioned to you guys, there is a local person in Newburyport who is a Drupal expert. She's $75 an hour. So I know that when departments have wanted to do a redesign, they have used her.
Okay.
So depending on how many hours of work it would be, she can do anything. And we just give her permission from the city to allow her to be on there to do that, which we've done in the past.
I almost think it would be easier just to have a link on the city's website to a separate page.
Yeah, we could do that too.
Kind of like what Parks has done,
Yep.
or youth services. Yeah.
And we talked to the mayor about that, and she was fine with that. And then it can be updated whenever we want. However, if it's, a simple website,
Okay. That sounds good.
WordPress, or, some other web. I mean, there's a lot more open source websites now than ever. So I think that's not a bad idea.
So I guess we're presenting this for two reasons. One is to make sure that there is agreement or buy-in that a website would be useful. In the way that we've been looking at it is, one, it will disseminate information, but two, would be a priority of actual engagement to get beyond that choir. The folks that are already interested and already understand and have buy-in to what the city may be doing in terms of resiliency. And then the other one is how to go about doing it in terms of either building off the Newburyport website or maybe going to an outside consultant. So I guess number one from everyone other than Sarah, Brett, and I, is how do you feel about, any questions for us in terms of our thinking behind, proposing a possible website, or, just what do you think about this?
Personally, I think the Salem Beverly company would be my first thought, doing something like that. I know it's not cheap, but there's someone handling it. We don't have to worry about volunteers doing it. It's a known budget if the city wants to fund that. It just seems like it's a better way to do it.
The only problem with that, Joe, I think you're right, because they are there to do that and update it as needed, is they own everything. So let's say we wanted to leave them, we would have nothing in the end.
Oh, you're kidding, really?
No, I don't know that we actually asked that. That was
Oh, I thought you said you did.
I'm not.
No, they would have the software and it would run on the site, but you'd retain your content.
You of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, but all the other stuff they would own.
You know, but that's pretty typical. I mean, I've been doing stuff like this for a long time, and our customers don't own the software that we create.
Yeah,
They get a license for it.
can't take it with you someday.
Right.
But
I
we
mean, the
didn't
only
get
thing would
into.
be is that if you went out of business, you'd have something in your agreement that you would get the rights to the source code, so you'd be able to recreate it on another site.
Mhm.
Right.
But I don't want to necessarily, I think that is something that we would have to ask
Certainly.
about and get clarification, what
Yeah.
what the city is comfortable with. But, Molly, I know that we talked to the mayor, and she, just a simple question, do we have to own the website? Yes, we have to own the website. But so I don't want to get hung up necessarily on that and this firm specifically,
Mhm.
but so more the approach to communicating this information with a website similar to, for instance, Beverly or Salem. Does that sit well with the group?
For me, I 100% agree with that. I think it's exactly what we need to do. Just as a reference, when we did this Plum Island MVP project with the town of Newbury, the consultants Horsley Witten put together a website where all of the mapping and all of the documents and reference materials were being kept for people to look at. It was even just having that website for a brief amount of time, because they're not going to maintain it for us, was really valuable. And we talked about, wanting to kind of keep that going. And I would envision having a resiliency website, a Newburyport Resiliency website, that would include all of that kind of thing. And any project that we move forward with could have data provided on that website. So I think it's important and a great idea.
Yeah, I do too. I think it's crucial. And do you know, well, we can find out from Horsley Witten what they used to set that up. It sounds like they did it pretty quickly and easily.
They did very quickly and easily.
Yeah, and as Brett said, I think it's a great idea. I don't know where the CSO information will live once we start getting that. I know that, it'll come down from the wastewater treatment facilities upriver, and it will come in probably to the health department, but it will need to go to a lot of places. So I think, having something like that sort of as a hook would make it even more valuable. But I think we need to have a site like this to house all the information and to share information and educate people.
There is other information too, databases that are available that you could, present on that site that might be important. I think that I came across it when some swimmers organization that tests the water at various places on Plum Island for swimming, and they post it every couple of weeks.
Yeah,
I can't even remember where it is now.
Yeah, well, it might be the master swimmers, but it also, the health department tests it every week, all summer long.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, collecting that data and putting it together, that stuff's relatively straightforward to do.
Yeah.
And that's the idea, to try to get something that would be engaging, provide interest that people want to find out, can I go swimming today, for example?
Mm-hmm.
Can I let my dog go in the river today?
Or
Right.
can I put my address in and see what the flood maps say? All those
Yeah,
things.
absolutely.
Right. That's a good
We
one
should have
too.
all of it. Yep, we should have all of it.
Yeah, so now we just have to figure out what's the best way to go about it?
Yeah, I had one question for this group who probably has a lot more experience. I have none in this regard, but one of the things in the resiliency plan was to engage the community, especially students. Have people ever started clubs at like the high school or anything like that where they could get engaged in this type of thing? You know, has it worked at all, or am I naive?
No, not at all. So at almost every level. So I guess they really start getting engaged when they're in the middle school. So at the knock, they have something called Clipper Crew. And they start getting engaged. And then there's GOMI, which is an outside organization that really gets kids engaged, and they keep them engaged through high school. And then the high school has an environmental club. And then there's other programs and internships that they can do. And the environmental club has been in, I think 14 years, been in existence, and has a teacher who is their kind of guidance person. So on a yearly basis, that's who keeps things going. But yeah, and the middle school kind of feeds up to the environmental club, but it starts off really strong at the beginning every year, and there's always, there's student leadership that run it. So yeah, they would absolutely be integral to this. And then of course there's Art Courier's group, ACES, and he engages a lot of students as well. So there's a number of organizations that we could work with as far as students go.
All right, great, that's good.
Okay, well, sorry, Brett, what you said, do you want to ask?
Also,
Okay, let's move on to it sounds like, yes, we should move forward. We just don't know exactly how to move forward. So I think the next step to talk briefly about the budget would be good. I think we all perked up at our last meeting when the mayor said, send me a budget. And we said, okay, we'll put together a budget. And then we realized, wait a minute, we're kind of maybe in some areas anyway, we're putting the cart before the horse, because we don't know, for instance, if we want to do a resiliency website or how, but would that be in this budget, to get us started? And so Brett had put this together. I think we sent it out. Brett, I don't know if you made changes.
yeah, I did.
But I had talked to Donna in the mayor's office, and I was given a date to get this in, but the way things go, the mayor had already submitted the supplemental budget to the city council before that meeting, and so this didn't ever get in front of her. And so we thought, okay, well, now we have some breathing room at least to get this right. And so here, this is where we're at. And Brett, go ahead. I think you had a great way of thinking about it in terms of, we need some more information. So do you want to take that?
Yeah, that was a discussion we had on Monday, but that was a long time ago. But I think we actually got a little bit of a picture today on how to go about this, because we just got kind of a calendar thing for putting together a budget between January and March, and the candidates that would go in there. So I think from our end of it now, we need to, look at what the wish lists are relative to resiliency, and, add ours to that particular list that then could go in for consideration. So yeah, we didn't know what the procedure was. We were just trying to put something down and that wasn't too ridiculous to get it into that supplementary budget that the mayor had talked about. But I think perhaps now, it's already getting to late October. I think we'll have our hands full trying to put together some things that we'd like to see funded, for January.
Yeah, so I think we're just looking for those of you that are more experienced with this. How important, especially with the resiliency brochure, Julia, did you have, that was coming out of probably?
We were going to fund that through the conservation funds.
Could you still fund it if it's not if we don't submit a budget?
Yeah.
Do you all think we should just go ahead and submit something, because it's crazy to leave money on the table that's already been offered? And is it even possible at this late date? I guess we have more questions than answers on this. We just don't.
Right.
We don't want to mess it up.
That's a good question. I don't meet with the mayor typically about these budget issues and the supplemental budget, although I know she's putting one in, or maybe already has. I don't know if Andy.
Yeah, if I could, I don't, we're not really talking about the current supplemental budget request, which is into the council. So I think I think it looks like we're really talking about, next budget cycle, or if there's another supplemental that is needed. So
Do you know if there is another supplemental budget on the?
I don't, again, that would be a question for Ethan Manning, the finance director, I think.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
just to
think-
see if there's something else coming along that could be tied to or linked to.
Yeah, maybe our best bet is to work on this as a proposal for the next budget cycle, to figure out what we really want out of this website and really nail that down in terms of how much that might cost and who we might go with and how that would happen. And then, get some actual costs for updating the MyMap program and things like that. And then just get it in for, unless we're in a real rush on these things, I think.
Yeah, I
Yeah, we-
agree. I think that's a good idea let's nail down the website because I think that's the biggest
Yeah.
piece right
Yeah.
now.
I totally agree too, because we were rush, and then we realized, why are we rushing?
Right,
Because
exactly.
it was on the table, and and especially because we just want to get it right, and I want
Exactly.
the committee to have a reputation of, if we have something in front of the city council or whoever, we've done our homework.
Yeah.
And
Because they will ask a million questions about it. And if you don't have the million answers, then it won't go anywhere.
so, okay, so Julia, we don't have to necessarily worry about
No,
the brochure in this for this budget. So, okay, Brett, Sarah, or anyone, is that sitting well?
Mhm.
Oh, I think it makes sense to me. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I
Good.
think so too.
Okay, so we'll start. We'll do our homework and then take this up more seriously in January. Then that sound right?
good.
Okay, thank you. All right, Joe.
Right.
And I can't remember who sent it out. This FEMA's most recent request for information on reviewing the floodplain management standards. Oh, that was you. That's how you got this job.
Yeah, that's how I volunteered.
I think you would pose, should we comment, submit comments, and then Janet had sent something, I don't know if it was to the group or me, about, oh, well, also, should we take this out as a letter to the editor or something like that in the local paper, in the Daily?
Yeah. Yeah, they have, like, if anybody's looked at this, the FEMA's got like 13 questions they have 18 questions that they have for commenters on how to update the floodplain management regulations. I have not gotten through all of them yet. But I think it'd be pretty involved for us to do any kind of submission to them. But I guess the regulations committee could look into it, and that would be great if Janet wanted to do a letter to the editor. But it's pretty involved. So
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering if we're really ready.
it's a federal case, let's put it that way.
Yeah. And the comments are due the end of this, like December 31st, right?
Yes.
Like that. Okay.
So I want to keep it short because I got 3 dogs harassing me to feed them.
Okay, well, unless we hear that, there's a real drive to do this from fellow members or anyone else, maybe we'll take a pass, but look at, this is either communicating through the paper or something else. Just take these issues. Does that sound?
Yeah,
All righty.
Yep.
All right, moving on then.
Yep.
Nice.
All right.
Can I ask one quick question? What's the status with MVP, Andy or Julia? Are we putting in any requests, or is there anything happening with MVP right now, planning?
I think we can have further discussion as far as where we're leaving off with the current projects in the next cycle, I guess, if that's the question.
Yeah, I thought we were focused on the water supply protection stuff right now.
Yeah, the assumption is that John Eric would be leading with a most crucial project from the water supply protection, but we haven't really talked about details, I guess.
Okay,
We should confirm that though. We need to have something lined up for the next grant round.
yeah, that's what I was
Yeah.
asking.
Yeah.
So I just want to hang on to that. So if Salem Beverly got an MVP grant to do theirs, is there any possibility we could look at an MVP grant for communication and development of the implementation plan?
To do our website, you mean?
Yeah,
Or, yeah.
If I
Basically.
could, I think that's definitely doable if that's eligible for the grant sources, but keep in mind that I think if there's a priority project, it's probably going to be the capital project for water supply protection.
you only get one. You can only go for one.
I think we can talk with our grant writer about that, but I think they'd only accept one and only want one
Okay.
from communities. So just keep that in
Sure.
mind. That they,
Okay.
from an overall cost benefit, what are we leveraging? It probably makes
Yep.
more sense to go up with the capital project.
Totally.
Sarah, I'll follow up with Nancy on that though, just to confirm.
Yeah, that would be great.
But we just need to make sure that we are actually applying for a capital project then in that case, we
And
don't
if
want to
there's-
see it.
if
go
there's a
by.
hole, we'll jump in there
Right.
with something else.
Yeah, right.
Right. Nancy will be definitely up to date on that.
Yeah. So rather than speculation, we can just confirm details after we hear them.
Perfect.
I'll do that. Let's see, regulations working group, and I don't want to spend much time on that other than to nail down a meeting time. And I noticed Rick dropped off, but he definitely wants to stay involved as well. Just to update, give a really quick update. I met with John O'Connell yesterday from Newbury, and he was a member of this committee prior to COVID anyway. And he's talked to folks in town hall in Newbury, and they're very much interested in working jointly with us on zoning, et cetera, for Plum Island, or just response resiliency efforts on Plum Island. So he doesn't necessarily want to be a member. He has some significant hearing issues, but he wants to stay involved, and he did very much want to express that Newbury is interested in working with us. And then Rick Tainer as well would like to be part of the group. I had emailed, I think, Julia and Andy about sort of how to get going. And Andy, I know you said, you're not really going to take it up formally anyway until January with the site design review. But I feel like there's a lot of legwork or groundwork that we can do in terms of research now to sort of ease that process. And speaking to Rick, he's up for that. He loves to write zoning and to research zoning, and he has a lot of experience in Portsmouth as well. Portsmouth, New Hampshire. He was a planning director there, and how that worked. So I think he has a lot to contribute. And yeah, I'd like to start working on it too. Not necessarily, nothing proposed, but just kind of laying that groundwork. So I was hoping to schedule a meeting to kickstart that effort. If that sounds good to you guys.
I think that's a great idea. And I think as we mentioned in our email, we should include Afro's Councillor Khan, who was involved in this, some of these issues with us back in the spring and wanted to pick it up again in the fall.
Yeah. And I think, I'd love to, definitely Afro's and any other counselors, the more involvement, the more education that we can provide to anyone that's going to be involved in the approval process and the implementation process, the better, I think. And so, the council is changing. We're in a real flux period with the election. And so who knows, I certainly don't have an idea who will end up, working with us in this group. But the more we can communicate outside the, outward, I think the better, the more participation we can get.
Someone's got a cat.
Yeah.
All the animals want their dinner.
Time's up, guys. And so, so first, but that doesn't necessarily mean nobody else from the council, I guess is my point. And I don't know about membership versus just going out, and I'm happy to talk to folks as we get going as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we learned a little bit of a lesson last spring in that we didn't enroll enough of the policymakers as we should have. Like Sharif, anything on Plum Island should have Sharif should have been involved from the outset in a lot of, and Ward 1 and just in general, and which is most of our coastal area that's subject to sea level rise. And then Afros obviously was involved. I just think that we need to be as inclusive as possible of the council, open it up to them, send them things to look at. We don't want this to come back at us again and in a way that makes us look like we ignored the feedback from last time.
Absolutely. That's great to hear. 100% agree. So how should we schedule the meeting? Do you want to do it offline at this point, or?
Yeah, this is Andy. Can I recommend we schedule that offline? Just because we're approaching 2 hours, and I apologize for saying this. I'm a person who probably attends more meetings than any of you. Is there any way we could look at the length of our meeting in the next meeting, and maybe some information could be gathered beforehand to answer questions, and that way we're not sort of spinning wheels on some things?
What are you referring to specifically, Andy? For
well, it seemed like there were some questions about, like, say, the CIP and so forth. So we could talk a little about, framework and so forth. That way, some of these general questions can be answered more efficiently.
Right. Yeah, and that's the next thing on this very long agenda, is how to move forward, because I know that you have real concerns about the meetings. The updates, I think, take a long time, but they're super important. And so maybe we have quarterly update meetings and I think I talked about this, working committee meetings in between, and those that need to attend. Because I'm having a really hard time figuring out these agendas with both the updates and educating the volunteers that are trying, to help out, because we're coming in kind of cold. So that's why we're asking about the CIP. We don't even, I didn't know the questions to ask, and wouldn't have if it wasn't brought up in this meeting.
And I think this was a really good agenda. It was a long agenda, but we added to it at the last minute by including the updates on the Central Waterfront Park and the Bulkhead. And I think that went on probably longer than we anticipated because of a lot of the discussion after Andy and Jordy gave their presentation. So I think we wouldn't normally go, almost 2 hours. And if it looks like our agenda is getting that long and we do have something like special like that, like a special project update, that maybe we postpone another item on the agenda till the next meeting or something.
Yeah. I am sensitive to the time. I'm totally burned out, and I don't spend all my days in the meetings. But any feedback, we can table this until the next meeting, or any feedback you want to give me, later or now, in terms of how to run these meetings so that we get to everything. But we don't.
You did it, Jane. I think you did an awesome job, really and truly. I think you're an excellent chair and handled this whole meeting superbly. I just think we had a lot on the agenda for today, and we probably won't, create such a long agenda next time because we won't have as many items.
No, thank you, Julia. But truly, I don't want to spend 2 hours in a meeting. And so how do we do that? Any ideas anyone has? I want to be effective and helpful, time sensitive. But I
think your idea of dividing, the different groups, and they just meet separately, and then there's a quick report from the groups with the whole group.
Okay, and then the quick reports, would those be monthly, you think? Bi-monthly?
Yeah, they could say it's just, just like the city council does, committee reports. Is there anything to report from committee?
Right. Like if the
Education
regulatory
committee
or the education subcommittee doesn't have anything to report, then it's just, no, we're not finished with that yet. Or maybe they say, look, we are going to have a lengthy presentation on this agenda because we have done so much. And then we know that ahead of time and can plan accordingly.
Okay, but still, and we can take, because this is taking long now. I don't know how to do that, and can help you on how to do that and get everything else done in terms of information. But we're all starting out too. This is a new group, so I think we just all need to get on the same page.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. This is sort of like a startup process that's just going to take a little bit longer. And this was a meeting where we got a lot done in those terms. So it probably will be more quick next time.
I hope so. That's what we're going for. All right, guys. So I'll circle back with those that I need to in terms of the working group next meeting. And Sarah, I know that you are a stellar note taker. Thank you. And so I'll look to those to make sure that nothing has fallen through the cracks in terms of following up or responsibilities.
Excellent. No,
Sound
I think
good?
that was great. Thank you so much, Jane,
All right.
everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Jane.